The EU has meanwhile rejected a draft proposal by Russia for a joint investigation at a meeting of the chemical weapons watchdog, the OPCW. Brussels also accused Russia of being unwilling to cooperate. Reporting from The Hague, here's our Europe correspondent, Peter Oliver.
Well, this special meeting of the OPCW got underway on Wednesday with Russia's permanent representative tabling a motion to start a inclusive, unified and what was called a constructive, civilised investigation. Well, this was dismissed out of hand by both the United Kingdom and the EU's representatives. We heard from the British side. They referred to Russia's proposal as perverted and an attempt to divert attention away from an investigation. They also went on to say that it was in poor taste for Russia to put this forward on this day, saying it was 1 year since the chemical weapons attack on a town in Syria which left over 100 people dead. The UK accuses the Assad government of carrying out that attack and accuses Russia of covering up and stopping an investigation into that. He said it was in contempt for the lives that were lost that Russia puts this forward on this day. He was then followed up by a representative from the European Union who said that the EU didn't agree with Russia's proposal for a joint investigation, saying that Russia hadn't provided information it should have done to the UK already. He also went on to say that the European Union had concerns that Russia could perhaps pull away from the OPCW entirely. Also, a representative from the European Commission saying that that laboratory in Porton-Down wasn't charged with determining where the chemical had come from, only determining what chemical it had been.
Our understanding is that the role of the expert there was to identify the type of agent that was used, not the source of the agent, and that's also what the experts have done. They did identify the nerve agent as Novichok. So that is what they have done. And for the rest, I would refer you to the March European Council, where I think European leaders have taken a clear position.
So we didn't get the answers to the many questions that we may have hoped for out of this meeting. We are hoping and should be hearing from the Russian permanent representative in just a little while. We'll be asking him for more about what unfolded at this meeting here in The Hague.
Well, let's get the thoughts now of Ken Livingstone, former Mayor of London. Welcome to the programme, Mr Livingstone. One of the words used by the British delegation at the OPCW meeting was to say that Russia's idea to have a joint investigation would be perverse. Does that effectively now preclude Russia from ever getting a chance to try and clear its name?
Well, they clearly don't want an open and honest investigation because the British government has set out to blame all of this on President Putin and Russia from the very beginning. And what is bizarre about this is all the evidence that's coming out brings us into question. It's not just that this is a chemical that could be made in many other places. We've just recently discovered that someone who worked on the site about 15 years ago was sent to prison for selling it illegally. So the idea that, it can only be Russia behind all this is nonsense. I mean, the simple fact is our country has a principle that you are innocent until proved guilty. But here we had our Prime Minister, Theresa May, on the television immediately denouncing Russia and starting to order the expulsion of Russian diplomats. And this has been taken up around the Western Bloc. I do think it's much more just a part of the politics of building an anti-Russia alliance again, like we had in the Cold War.
As you and I both know, there are always elements of an investigation as sensitive as this. Some things can be in the public domain, some things aren't. But the rush to blame Russia without providing any public evidence of this, do you think at some point Theresa May, or Number 10, is going to have to come out with something?
Well, I'm not certain they will, because our politics is just about lies and smears that get repeated all the time. And most of the British media is Tory and Conservative controlled, so they won't challenge or undermine any of this. And literally, we've just had decades and decades of this. I remember growing up in that post-war world where we were told we had to close the missile gap with the Soviet Union. And then when President Kennedy won the election on that pledge, his first briefing, he's told, well, Russia's got 4 nuclear missiles, America's got 350. So I'm always a bit doubtful about believing what comes out of the lips of presidents and prime ministers.
What about foreign secretaries? While you were talking there, we were just seeing some pictures of Boris Johnson. I know you're not his biggest fan, but do you think he's trying to wriggle out of his previous statements? He was being very forthright from day one against Russia on this. Do you think he might start backtracking a little bit now?
Well, I fought Boris Johnson in 2 mayoral elections, and I have to say, he just says what he thinks he needs to say at the time. I've never known a politician so completely and utterly unrelated to facts. I mean, he wouldn't even read his briefings before we went into those debates. He just says what he thinks will go down well at the time. So my broad advice is pay no attention to anything that's ever said by a foreign secretary. It will invariably be rubbish.
You might have thought that the Foreign Office civil servants might be a little more careful with their Twitter, though. We've been reporting about that tweet that's now been deleted, the one that had originally said that Porton Down had said, yes, it definitely came from Russia. You know as well as I do, when something's out there on Twitter, you can't get rid of this kind of stuff. Do you think it was an honest mistake, or is it closing the door after the horse has bolted?
Well, it could just be it was, genuine mistakes, people rushing to make a judgment too soon. But I have to say, there's been such a consistently hostile approach to Russia since President Putin came to power. And I think there's a lot of concern amongst Western interests that he's built a very secure and strong Russia again, following the catastrophic 8 years under President Yeltsin. So I think there's a lot of fear and doubt about him. I think that's nonsense. I mean, Putin and Russia would like to reach out to the West, build better economic links and so on. And that's the best way of proceeding in the future, not ramping up all this nonsense.
One other thing that Britain said was that Russia could have waited a couple of weeks before taking this to the OPCW at The Hague. Well, given that it stands accused very vocally from number 10 onwards, and also this admission from Porton Down about the origins of this nerve agent, why would Russia wait?
I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous because, literally, Theresa May was up there virtually from day one blaming Russia and President Putin for this. The idea that, we need a long delay before we can have a serious investigation. I mean, Theresa May was making these claims before there'd even been the first report from the people investigating the incident. And we still haven't had their final report. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if it is never made available to the public.
OK, I appreciate your thoughts this evening. Ken Livingstone, former Mayor of London, thanks for joining us on RT.
Thank you.